Evelyn Colón, just 15 years old, and already carrying the weight of two lives, her own and the child growing inside her. It was late 1976 in Jersey City, New Jersey, when Evelyn vanished without a word. No one saw her leave, and no one thought, at first, that something terrible had happened. She was young, in love, and pregnant. People assumed she'd run off with her boyfriend, Luis Sierra, to start a new life. But that assumption would cost her everything. For decades, Evelyn's name would disappear from every record, every report, every trace of existence. She would become known only by another name, one the police gave her when they found what was left of her. They called her Beth Doe. Before she vanished, Evelyn was like any teenage girl in the mid-70s, bright, sensitive, and curious about the world. Her family remembers her laughter, her love of dancing, her warm presence at home, but she was also restless. She wanted independence. When she met Luis Sierra, she saw a way to escape the tight boundaries of her parents' world. He was older, charming, and promised her everything: freedom, love, a future. When she became pregnant, her family worried. She was only 15, but in December 1976, Evelyn left home to live with him. Her parents didn't know where they went. A few weeks later, a letter arrived, supposedly from Luis, saying Evelyn had given birth to a healthy baby and would reach out again soon. The handwriting was familiar enough to believe. So, her family waited. That letter would be the last sign of her life for nearly half a century. Because a few days after that letter was sent, something unimaginable happened. On a freezing December afternoon in Pennsylvania, almost 100 miles away, a teenage boy walking along the Lehigh River made a discovery that would haunt investigators for decades. Down below the bridge, 3 old suitcases were lying open against the rocks. The contents spilled into the wind: fragments of clothing, blankets, and something else. Something no one was prepared to see. Inside those suitcases were the dismembered remains of a young woman and a near full-term unborn child. Police were called immediately. Detectives arrived at the scene and were struck by the brutality. Whoever this young woman was, her killer had gone to great lengths to erase her, to make sure no one would ever recognize her again. She had been strangled, assaulted, and then mutilated in ways that left even seasoned investigators shaken. They scoured the scene for clues, luggage tags, fingerprints, any identifying marks. But nothing matched. The body didn't fit any missing person report in Pennsylvania or neighboring states. Forensic technology was primitive then, and cross-state databases didn't exist. All they had was the body of a young woman, a life violently stolen and hidden in 3 suitcases by a river. She was given a name, but not her own: Beth Doe, a placeholder for a person no one could claim. Over the next few years, investigators would try everything they could think of. They took dental impressions, cataloged every scar, studied the fibers from the suitcases. Sketch artists reconstructed her face over and over again. Posters were mailed to police departments across the country. Still, nothing. No one came forward. As time passed, Beth Doe faded into the long list of America's forgotten mysteries. An unsolved crime buried under newer headlines, newer tragedies. Her case gathered dust, the files turning yellow with age. And back in New Jersey, the Colón family still waited for Evelyn's promised phone call. They thought she was living somewhere far away, raising her baby, building the life she had chosen. They never knew that their daughter, the one they believed had found happiness, had been found long ago, discarded in a place where no one thought to look. Years turned into decades. Technology changed. Forensic science evolved. But Beth Doe remained nameless. It would take more than 40 years and a single strand of DNA to bring the truth full circle. The young girl who vanished in 1976 had been found within days of her disappearance, but it would take a lifetime to learn her name. And when they finally did, it wouldn't just be Evelyn's story they uncovered. It would be a revelation that exposed a hidden brutality and a truth that justice nearly forgot. The investigation into the murder of the woman known only as Beth Doe began with desperation and confusion. Detectives from Carbon County, Pennsylvania, walked through the frozen air beside the Lehigh River, trying to piece together who she was and who had done something so unspeakable. The scene was brutal. Her remains had been stuffed into 3 different suitcases, tossed from the Interstate 80 bridge. The cold December air had slowed decomposition, preserving details that painted a horrifying picture. She had been strangled, sexually assaulted, and dismembered with precision. Her body cut into pieces and packed tightly, as if the killer had done it before. One of the detectives, a man who had worked homicide for over a decade, would later say it was one of the worst things he had ever seen. But what haunted him most wasn't the violence. It was the child, the baby that never got to live. The coroner determined she was in her final weeks of pregnancy. That detail broke something inside everyone who worked the case. It wasn't just a murder. It was the end of 2 lives. Investigators immediately ran her fingerprints through every available system, which at the time meant boxes of paper files. They found nothing. Dental records were sent across state lines, but there was no match. The woman's features, brown hair, about 5 feet 4 inches, possibly Hispanic or mixed race, were noted, but it could describe thousands of missing women. Police checked local bus stations, hotels, and hospitals for pregnant women who had recently disappeared. No one recognized her. There was no missing report that fit. They believed she had been killed somewhere nearby, then driven to the river. Whoever did it knew the area. The bridge was remote, quiet, the kind of place you'd only find if you'd been there before. The suitcases had been old and distinctive, one of them covered in floral patterns. They traced the luggage back to a department store chain, but those suitcases had been sold nationwide. Another dead end. For years, the case barely moved. The woman became known only as Beth Doe, the 35th unidentified murder victim of Pennsylvania that year. Her baby was listed as Baby Doe. They were buried together in an unmarked grave in Whitehaven, Pennsylvania. Every so often, a new detective would take a fresh look at the case. They tried new forensic techniques as the decades passed: facial reconstructions, isotope testing, even computer modeling. Anything that might bring her name back. In the early 2000s, her case appeared on television shows and online databases of unidentified victims. Her reconstructed face haunted viewers, but no one ever called to claim her. Then came a new tool that changed everything: DNA. By the 2010s, forensic genealogy was starting to solve decades-old mysteries. The kind that had no fingerprints, no witnesses, no answers. Only bones and DNA left behind. Detectives exhumed Beth Doe's remains, hoping modern science could do what 1970s technology never could. They built a DNA profile and uploaded it into national databases. Still nothing. But they didn't stop. As genealogy networks expanded, they ran it again through the new systems that connected family trees and distant relatives. And one day, in 2020, something clicked. A partial match appeared. A living relative from New Jersey. It wasn't a direct connection, but it was enough for genealogists to start building a family tree. They worked backward, identifying cousins, siblings, distant branches until they landed on one name: Evelyn Colón. Her family had last seen her in 1976. The details matched perfectly: her age, her pregnancy, her Puerto Rican heritage, and the timing. Detectives reached out to the Colón family, asking if they could submit DNA samples for comparison. When the results came back, the truth was undeniable. Beth Doe wasn't a mystery anymore. She was Evelyn Colón. The 15-year-old girl who vanished from Jersey City had been found 44 years later, buried in a Pennsylvania cemetery under a name that was never hers. For her family, the discovery was shattering. They had lived for decades believing Evelyn had chosen to leave, believing she had grown up and built a life somewhere else. Now they learned she had been murdered within days of her disappearance, and the man responsible, the one she trusted most, was still out there. When investigators confirmed that Beth Doe was actually Evelyn Colón, everything shifted. The cold case that had haunted Pennsylvania for over 4 decades suddenly had a name, a family, and a direction. And with that name came the next question: who had killed her? From the beginning, detectives had known Evelyn was last seen with her boyfriend, Luis Sierra, the man she was living with when she disappeared in 1976. He had been the one to send that strange letter to her family, claiming she'd given birth and was fine. That letter had bought him silence for years. Now, with Evelyn's identity confirmed, investigators decided to look back into his life. What they found was disturbing. Luis Sierra had continued living quietly in New York. He'd never been charged with a violent crime. He had no public record that screamed killer. But something about his behavior after Evelyn's disappearance stood out. He'd cut ties with her family immediately, moved around frequently, and never once reported her missing. When detectives compared the timeline, the day Evelyn vanished, the letter's postmark, and the discovery of her body, everything aligned too perfectly. The letter had been mailed just before Evelyn's remains were found in Pennsylvania. In early 2021, Pennsylvania State Police finally had enough to move in. They tracked Luis Sierra to Ozone Park, Queens, where he was living under his real name, now in his 60s. Detectives arrived at his door after nearly half a century of waiting for this moment. When they told him why they were there, he didn't deny knowing Evelyn. But he didn't admit guilt either. He simply said, "That was a long time ago." DNA and circumstantial evidence tied him directly to her. He had been the last person to see her alive, the only one with access, and the one who sent that final letter. After reviewing forensic data, timelines, and his interviews, police were confident. Evelyn Colón had been murdered by the man she trusted most. Luis Sierra was arrested in March 2021 and charged with criminal homicide. For Evelyn's family, the news was both a relief and a heartbreak. They had spent 45 years wondering what had happened to her. The truth, as painful as it was, at least gave them closure. During questioning, Sierra offered no real explanation, no reason, no confession. He simply denied involvement. But the evidence told its own story. Evelyn had been strangled, likely after a fight. She was heavily pregnant, nearly ready to give birth. Sierra may have panicked, fearing the consequences of fathering a child with a minor. Instead of facing it, he chose to silence her permanently. After killing her, he dismembered her body and placed her remains in the suitcases. Investigators believe he drove across state lines into Pennsylvania, stopping at the Lehigh River bridge to throw them over. Then, as if to cover his tracks, he mailed the letter to Evelyn's family to make it seem like she was still alive. It was cruel, calculated, and meant to erase her forever. But time had other plans. The decades that passed didn't bury Evelyn's memory. They preserved it. Every detective who touched her case left a trail, a report, a piece of evidence that eventually led to DNA testing. And when that match came in 2020, it brought Evelyn's name back to life and brought Luis Sierra face to face with the truth he thought he'd buried. In 2023, after years of delays, Sierra was officially held accountable. He pleaded not guilty, but the evidence continued to mount. Evelyn's family attended court, their faces filled with both anger and grief. They listened as prosecutors described the horror she endured, the brutality, the betrayal, and the decades of silence that followed. For the Colón family, there were no words that could undo the pain. But at least, after nearly half a century, they had her name carved into a gravestone. Her real name. And this time, it wouldn't read Beth Doe. It would read Evelyn Colón, 1961 to 1976. The arrest of Luis Sierra hit the Colón family like a wave they had been bracing for their entire lives. For decades, they had carried the quiet ache of uncertainty, never knowing if Evelyn was safe, alive, or gone. Now, that ache turned into something heavier. The reality of what he had done. When detectives told them that the man Evelyn left home with was the same man who had taken her life, her mother wept. Her father, too broken to speak, just sat in silence. The image they'd built of Evelyn, living somewhere far away, maybe raising her child, shattered completely. She had been gone all along, lying in a Pennsylvania grave under a name no one recognized. At the courthouse in Carbon County, cameras flashed as Sierra was led in. The man was gray-haired now, frail even. But the brutality of what he'd done was still fresh in the files, still printed in black and white photos from 1976. Evelyn's dismembered body, the suitcases, the letter, every image, every detail, every word told the same story, one of control, fear, and betrayal. Prosecutors described how Sierra manipulated Evelyn, isolating her from her family. She was only 15, pregnant, scared, and entirely dependent on him. When she became a burden, he didn't see a child he'd created or a girl he loved. He saw a problem to get rid of. The brutality of his crime showed premeditation. He didn't just kill her. He made sure her identity disappeared with her. Her family sat through every word, their faces marked by decades of loss and grief. Evelyn's sister clutched her hands together tightly as prosecutors recounted how Evelyn's remains were dumped in suitcases, how her unborn baby was torn from her, and how her family never got a goodbye. During the proceedings, Sierra showed almost no emotion. He avoided eye contact with the Colón family. He said nothing when asked why. The silence was his only answer. The same silence he had forced on Evelyn for 45 years. As the case moved forward, the public followed every update. For years, the name Beth Doe had haunted Pennsylvania cold case archives. Now, that story had a face, a family, and a name that echoed louder than ever. Evelyn Colón. Her identification sparked something larger than just her own case. Across the country, law enforcement agencies began re-examining their lists of unidentified victims. Evelyn's story became proof that no matter how old a case was, DNA could still speak when everything else was silent. In news interviews, Evelyn's relatives spoke softly, often through tears. They said they never imagined it would take this long to find her. They thanked the investigators and genealogists who refused to stop looking. But they also spoke about the anger, the years stolen from them, the birthdays that never came, the daughter who was erased by someone who promised to love her. In the small town where she had been buried for decades, people began leaving flowers on her grave. Someone had replaced the plain stone that once read Beth Doe with one that bore her true identity. It was simple, but powerful. Evelyn Colón, beloved daughter and mother. Even those who never knew her felt her story deeply. She became a symbol of lost justice reclaimed, a reminder that no matter how much time passes, truth has a way of breaking through. But for Evelyn's family, justice was bittersweet. Finding her didn't erase what happened. It didn't bring her home. It only confirmed that the hope they held onto for so long had always been misplaced. The man who took her life had lived freely for 45 years. Evelyn never got that chance. Still, her story, once buried in a cold case file, had finally been told. When the verdict finally came, it wasn't just a courtroom decision. It was a lifetime of unanswered questions finally given a voice. Luis Sierra was found guilty of murder, and as the judge read the sentence, the Colón family cried quietly in their seats. For the first time in 45 years, Evelyn had justice. Her story, once buried under the name Beth Doe, was now spoken aloud. Her real name, her real face, her real story. And it wasn't just for her family. It was for every nameless woman lost in old case files, for every cold case that still waits for a name, for every parent still wondering if their child is out there somewhere. Evelyn Colón's case proved one thing: time doesn't kill truth. It only waits for science, persistence, and people who refuse to give up. After the trial, Evelyn's family visited her grave together. Her mother placed a single white flower on the headstone. The words carved there finally meant something real. Evelyn Colón, 1961 to 1976. Loved, remembered, never forgotten. The wind was cold that day, the same kind of cold that had once surrounded her body near the Lehigh River. But this time, there was peace. She wasn't Beth Doe anymore. She was Evelyn, daughter, sister, mother-to-be, and her story would never fade again. For the investigators who spent their careers chasing her identity, the case became a reminder of why they do what they do. Because even when decades pass, even when files gather dust, every story deserves an ending. Every victim deserves their name back. And Evelyn's name will live on, not as a mystery, not as a Jane Doe, but as a symbol of what persistence and truth can uncover. If you're watching this, and you believe stories like Evelyn's should never be forgotten, if you believe every unidentified victim deserves their name back, then help keep her memory alive. Like this video, subscribe, and share her story. Each click, each share, spreads awareness and keeps pressure on the unsolved cases still waiting for their day of truth. Because behind every missing name, there's a face. Behind every face, there's a story. And behind every story, there's a family still waiting. Just like Evelyn's once did. Justice came too late for her. But it came. And for that, she'll never be forgotten.